All right, sorry for those watching the video, but we got to get set up. Make sure everything's going the proper way. Looks like we are. Just give me 1 second. Whenever I do video, I hate doing video. This is why I don't do video because it takes a minute to make sure everything is connected the way it should be and syncing up at the same time. So, but that being said, welcome back to another episode of Facilitate Local Podcast. I did do videos for the first four episodes, but I don't know. I knew I wasn't gonna be in the mood to engage as much as I would have liked to because things have just been extremely intense. There's been a lot of conversations, but I'm tired of waiting. So I'll be reading in and out of my notes for some people watching video. I'm not really focused on looking at the camera. Sorry. I just know people like video. So exhausted. I do have a script, like I said, that I want to say for the podcast in this moment, but I'm going to be speaking on and off the cuff. So editing's definitely going to reflect that if you're watching the video and the audio. I'm going to keep this in there, but if things seem a little out of order, that might be why, but I think I'll do pretty all right. Whew. Encountering other people's testimony and listening to Little Rock and New York, Brooklyn, particularly where I'm at, see that those narratives are so strong from all different perspectives. And day to day, there just seems to be so many things that are new, even with all of the new murders and stories. But moving forward, there will be separate communication tools for the podcast. So an Instagram handle at Facilitate Local, and there's a Twitter handle already at Facilitate Local. If you want to email anything, a comment, a concern, a suggestion, anything at facilitate local at gmail.com is where you can do that. I never want to rush to speak, post, or otherwise, but I do want to use this platform to communicate as most effectively as I can. I'm not going to tell other people how to use their platforms or let other people tell me how that I should use mine. That is so much of a statement as it is a self reminder, but I will not. Hmm. I would say with my personal endeavors and pitches, I'm definitely focused toward entry in spaces where me and mine can own, blueprint, and develop. The intersections and topics I've chosen are the ones that I've chosen for reasons that are very important to me. And as far as coming back to Little Rock to host a workshop or a conference or a summit or like whatever we want to call it, with social distancing and COVID and me being up here, I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate that for the most part. Um, but we are going to do something. I do have a complete ish set of ideas that I'm going to start reaching out with people this week. But one thing in particular that I started listening to that I want to finish listening to before I want to move forward with anything is the Rock the Culture podcast with Antoine Phillips and Charles Blake. Charles Blake is the Little Rock mayor's chief of staff, and Antoine Phillips is a well-known lawyer and writer. The Rock the Culture podcast is sponsored by a local news reporting periodical called the Arkansas Times. It's been around for a very long time. Um, Knowing how much work that they've each done, particularly Mr. Blake, who has been on the House of Representatives for several years and been doing a lot of this work for a very long time. That's kind of a podcast episode that you could watch to catch yourself up all the way. Like what work has already been done? What do we need to do? Where do we need to go from here? Um, Definitely. And so I got pretty halfway through, and I was like, I was working on stuff and trying to do things for my clients because I've definitely been behind in that because I've been so exhausted, physically exhausted. All of this has really been affecting me in weird ways. But anyway, as I was listening, I was like, I'm actually need to take notes. I was trying to write things down and here and there, but I was like, no, this is something I can take notes on because I have actual notes from the community to compare from. And so, anyway, moving forward, like I said, I want to finish that episode. And I only mention that because, or one of the reasons why I mentioned that is because they are planning, they mentioned a summit, doing some sort of um, summit around drafting laws, or I'm not sure what the particular words they use, but like a billing summit or something of that nature. And that's exactly where I personally think needs to be done right now, in a lot of different spaces. I'm not sure exactly everything that needs to be drawn, but I know that he would know better than I, of course. And so definitely want to finish listening to that. But as I move forward, I'm going to continue doing this podcast. In this episode, I'm going to kind of double down on just some of the things that I've been doing and what this podcast is going to be about. I'm going to go in a little bit more in depth about why I've chosen some of these resources. You could almost call this resources part two. I might call it my 2 cents. I don't know what I'm going to call this episode. But yeah. Let's see. So, Facilitate Local is a trademark brand and podcast built to extend conversations around complex and specific topics. We've already talked about the first few episodes and the first 6 topics that you heard in my little intro. And the resources that are on the website are going to be provided in the following categories: read, watch, listen, relieve, demand, solidarity, and for allies. Like I said, I'm still working on that wireframing. All of those, that main bar is probably the only thing that's not functional on the website. As I start adding those things, which could be as early as tonight after I post this video and get some client stuff done. Might be whenever I finally link those up. But like I said, I've been kind of going through old stuff, seeing what I'm looking at what's being circulated, and particularly what conversations have we already had, right? Especially nationally. Like nationally, what conversations have we already had? And I think that's at the point where, you know what, not even going to go down that route. But the sources for the main topics of Facilitate Local will be in a separate resource category. New episodes of Facilitate Local podcast will resume weekly on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think. Clearly, the first 4 episodes are available, and then updated later today along with 2 new episodes. Original segments were organized for like 8 to 10 minutes, but ultimately I just want to keep everything under 35 minutes. Anything longer than that, I'm going to split it into 2 episodes just for easier listenability. I'll add more and more resources as I start to communicate with other grassroots individuals and nonprofit organizations and gather a bigger pulse on the happenings from think tanks to town halls and meetings. You can enter your email address on the website for updates as they happen if you are wanting to be that involved, because I'm really going to need my core team of people that I've worked with before, but I'm going to need some new people as well. It's imperative that I acknowledge that I am not creating this podcast for user downloads. I believe I have to use whatever platforms I can create and or have to create the change that I wish to see. Like I said, there's currently 4 episodes of the podcast out, and I'll continue to add more and find a weekly rhythm. I want it to be Tuesdays and Thursdays, but we'll see. The dynamic of everything happening in our country is just so complex. I can see it just in so many ways, and I want to talk about it on here, but it's still going to take some time to put all those things together. Thank you to all of my friends that have been protesting physically, donating, raising funds, getting people to match your funds. I have friends that are right outside the jail doing bailouts, bailing out protesters. I mean, it's and so many other ways. Like my friends that are owning business and people that I've worked for that are owning businesses. It's incredible to see how everyone is inputting and communicating right now, but there's still some larger things that I think need to happen and some larger conversations that need to happen other than just like white people, y'all need to read. That being said, I've definitely, one thing I did want to talk about is in terms of contribution, and one thing that I want to be better about is amplifying others and my personal communication. Above are examples of how I have recently recycled my black dollar, and I want to see other people continue to do the same. I pre-ordered 2 books from at Stupid Black Girl. That's her Instagram handle. Um, got one for me, one for my girl, and then so we can read that together. I thought that would be kind of a cool thing for us to do. And we also got pre-ordered Dapper Dan's upcoming memoir, and so those will come out to us early July. But looking really, really excited about that, to learn about the diversity and complex things that he had to achieve in this crazy high level industry. It's one thing to be hearing about it from Kanye West. It's going to be another thing hearing about it from Dapper Dan. Also got 2 shirts for us from Jay Purley at Jay Purley. It's a guy that I met actually as my Uber driver. And then, I just noticed how vibrant he was. And I've been following him at Instagram ever since. And he's just such a foodie. He's always making jokes, and he's actually does like e-commerce. And so we bought a couple shirts from him. And I realized I never bought a book from Chris the Journey James. And so if you go at Chris the Journey James, I actually copped Black Boy Blues, one of his older poetry books, but he has a newer book that's a children's book that would be great if you have kids. I ain't got no kids right now. So, and then shout out to him, because I think previously in Roses, I may have mentioned the pitching competition that BK Simmons and his partners were sponsoring, and Chris won, I believe, $10,000 in that pitch. So that was really, really dope on both sides to see that happen. And then the last thing I ordered is actually right here. It's a love story waiting to happen. It was sent with love, and I'm very, very excited. I forgot I was actually going to open. That's why it's sitting there. I was going to actually open this on the pod and show people the cover, and then sit it on the stack here, because, like I said, it's a very important time to be supporting Black merchants of all kinds, and people that, if you've ever heard their story and they have it published, it's a very big deal, I think, to support that in any kind of way possible. And yeah, you can go on Amazon, and yeah, it's cheaper on Amazon, but I went directly to her site and bought it from her. Same with Chris. And then also, I thought this was actually the last thing. This is called A Love Story Waiting to Happen. It's a wonderful, wonderful poetry book. I've actually have a copy back home, but didn't bring it with me. There's several books that I just overlooked and didn't bring with me. And during these hard times, I was like, I really want to. I went to a couple of those live readings, and I was just like, I need Crystal's energy, just because she does a marvelous job of telling her story. As a Black woman, as a Black human, just her existence. And then the last thing that I did to recycle my black dollar was, there's a clothing company called Ropes Clothing. So I think it's ropesclothing.com. Felix, shout out to Felix and his company, and Dion Boykin, because that's the reason why I know about that. So I copped a shirt from that to support the cause as well. So spent about $100 trying to recycle my black dollar just in that kind of way at the moment. And I encourage everyone else and challenge everyone else to do the same. That should be one of the trends that we should be setting right now, especially with Juneteenth coming up extremely soon in a few days. But like I said, about to move into more of the who, what, why did you choose these things and whatnot. Am I going to pause? No, I'm not going to pause. So why I chose the topics to facilitate local. I already had an interest in lynching history, and I've talked about that already. But on October 22nd, 2019, the president tweeted the following. So someday, if a Democrat becomes president and the Republicans win the White House, even by a tiny margin, they can impeach the president without due process or fairness or any legal rights. All Republicans must remember what they are witnessing here, a lynching, but we will win. These are notes that I had before the times that we're currently in, before the young brother in California. That's what a lynching is, Mr. President. Man, And I actually have a quote from Amber Ruffin of Seth Meyers. And she said it best back then, and I think it wraps up exactly how I feel right now. Uh, you value black people so little that you feel comfortable comparing a black person dying to your slight discomfort. End quote. It is so disgusting. But I digress. Lynching history is one that is, although uncomfortable for most, is such a blueprint of American history. This past September of 2019 was actually the 100-year anniversary of the Elaine Massacre. There is a piece of the Arkansas Times. If you go to issue.com, issuu.com, you can actually search the Arkansas Times and you can get all of these issues for free. So if you never got the print version, you don't have a subscription or anything like that, you can actually get them for free and read those articles. It's a very good resource tool, especially during these times. And so you can actually find, this was August 2019 for the Arkansas Times, The Ghost of Elaine. They did a cover story. There's some stuff. This cover story is actually shot by Joshua Asante. There's a poem inside by Joshua as well. Great resource tool, especially for going through that. But according to the Equal Justice Initiative's third edition of Lynching in America, Confronting the Legacy of Racial Terror, Phillips County, Arkansas had the most lynchings, 245 from 1877 to 1950. The second county on that list is Lafourche, Louisiana. That number is 52, if that shows you any sight of severity at this period of time. Compare 52 to 245. Of 12 southern states, Arkansas is fourth in the list of African Americans lynched in the South. I feel like there's a lot of stories about the top three, Mississippi, Georgia, and Louisiana, for a lot of reasons. But the lynching history in Arkansas is somewhat a little more scarce, and the stories around it can be very terrifying. I'm not gonna lie. Whenever Donald Trump decided to use that word, it became just how clear how many people never even thought about the history of the word lynching. The trending nature of the president's ignorance brought back a dirty word back into the mainstream, and it was a very interesting trend, especially as we digress to now. In the spring of 2019, I actually had like other plans. I had vacation plans, and there was a very specific symposium at Mosaic Templars Cultural Center, downtown Little Rock. The symposium was on the 100-year anniversary of the Elaine Massacre and lynching history. It was one of the most informative things that I've ever even been to. The way that they dispersed educational material, they had free flash drives they were giving out with all of the presentation material outside of the speaker's direct notes. But any slides they were on there. So if you took notes yourself, you could compare and go through it just like you were, in a college class. There were so many things, but the symposium, there was a specific speaker that answered a lot of questions. That speaker was the assistant professor of history at UALR. I'm so sorry that I don't have his name right here. The symposium was just incredible, and this speaker, the topics he tackled in reference not only to Elaine, but how Tulsa has dealt with resolving their racial history. Very, very interesting. So, I mean, a lot of things I'll be talking about in this episode is going to be, or this topic, just what happened in Elaine. What is the definition of lynching? What was the Great Migration? Because of that symposium, why hasn't the Equal Justice Initiative done more to connect with Elaine? Why hasn't Arkansas used Oklahoma as a blueprint to secure this history? What should be done to commemorate these victims' separate descendants? And as we continue to move forward, there's a quote directly from that symposium. There are truths that are unavoidable if we are honest about our history, but that is something that we have never been. Oklahoma is trying very hard to deal with this history. There is a commission to go out and actively find bodies, to try to ascertain the scope of violence that took place in Tulsa, to try to account for the missing people, and to try to offer up something of substance for those families. It is only my hope that Arkansas does the same, and it sees some value in giving these families closure in Elaine in Phillips County. It's a quote from the assistant professor of UALR. Well before I attended this symposium, like I said, I went to the black-owned bookstore called Pyramid on 17th and Chester in downtown Little Rock. When I went there for the first time, there was so many interesting books that I'd never seen in the regular bookstore, even though I hang out in whatever section I want to in the library and just, or Barnes and Noble. There's certain books that you're not going to see. And there was a book that I found called White Man's Heaven. And so that's what this third book is down. If you're watching the video, it is about the lynching and expulsion of blacks from 1894 to 1909 in the Ozarks. The Ozarks is a area. I think she summarizes things as the Ozarks, but she's particularly talking about Northwest Arkansas. And one of the reasons that I'm going to bring this up particularly right now is there's been a lot of things happening with Harrison, Arkansas. And I'll even pause, take a little extra moment, kind of refresh and even see, because I've been checking it daily to see how it's been going. If you typed in Black Lives Matter billboard in Harrison, Arkansas, there's a GoFundMe. Currently, there is $3,175 raised with a $4,000 goal. They want to put up a Black Lives Matter billboard, and they have the fees and everything that are on here, what it's going to cost, and whatnot. There's a very controversial billboard that says anti-racist is code word for anti-white, and that is in Harrison, Arkansas. It's so interesting to see everyone talking about Harrison as a subject, and everyone knows how racist it is. If you're black and you're traveling through Harrison, don't stop, do this, don't do this. I remember we had a band thing, and it was such a big deal once whenever I was like 12 or 13. I think people's parents came just for like extra supervision. I can't even remember, but it was a weird experience, even then, because as much as we know that Harrison is racist, it's like, what is the story of it? And I will read an excerpt here that is from White Man's Heaven that I think highlights the brevity of racial tension and unrest in Arkansas and Southern history. On January 18th, 1901, almost 2 months prior to the arrival of the railroad in Harrison, a new governor was sworn in at Little Rock. Jeff Davis, former Arkansas Attorney General and son of a Baptist preacher. He was an avowed Democrat and a populist demagogue. Despite coming from a privileged background, he declared this is on, knife to knife, hilt to hilt, foot to foot, knee to knee, between the corporations of Arkansas and the people. He used racism to appeal to thousands of poor whites across Arkansas in the same manner as U.S. Senators James K. Vardaman of Mississippi, Tom Watson of Georgia, and Pitchfork Ben Tillman of South Carolina. After Davis inspected a state prison camp, he told a horrified crowd at Hot Springs, Arkansas, that the first sight that greeted my eyes was a great big black Negro with a pump gun guarding the white men and driving them down the road, saying, "Hold that cotton, damn you, or I will kill you." Davis was not afraid to challenge even President Theodore Roosevelt. In 1901, Roosevelt earned the ire of Southerners for daring to entertain Booker T. Washington at the White House. When Roosevelt visited Little Rock in 1905, Davis seized upon the opportunity to cement his reputation as a defender of the Southern way of life and delivered a speech that was a curious mixture of racial moderation and undisguised Negrophobia. Davis argued that lynching was an appropriate and justified response to African American men preying upon white women. Roosevelt, never one to back down, especially in the face of ignorance, rebuked Davis. And you, as governor and all other exponents of the law, owe it to our people, owe it to the cause of civilization, do everything in our power, officially and unofficially, to drive the menace and reproach of lynch law out of the United States. Davis' popularity remained intact, allowing him to continue to effectively use fear as political capital. Far from the racially charged atmosphere of Little Rock, African Americans in Harrison eked out an existence as servants, day laborers, porters, and washerwomen. Efforts to reconstruct what happened to the black community in Harrison are hampered by missing court records and gaps in surviving newspapers that coincide with the dates of racial unrest in 1905 and 1909. Further, only one court records and gaps in surviving newspapers that coincide with the dates of racial unrest in 1905 and 1909. Or, excuse me. Further, only one handwritten note. That's got to be a typo. Further, only one handwritten note from the grand jury foreman, Max Damp, has survived. What little can be gleaned about the racial upheaval in Harrison comes from the newspapers of neighboring towns, but the newspapers are limited in their coverage of events that began in the autumn of 1905. That chapter continues about the landmark of that racial unrest, and some of the main resources for this episode are going to be the Arkansas Times and old periodicals, as well as Without Sanctuary, which is the largest lynching photography book that exists. There's another newspaper periodical book called 100 Years of Lynching that I've mentioned before, called by Ralph Ginsberg, that contains some extremely chilling reports of the case of Emmett Till. So just like the way that Harper mentioned about the gaps in records and surviving newspapers, you can actually, if you're from the South, you know the story of Emmett Till. But there's so many people, whenever even if you talk about just like the history of racism, and then you don't know the name Emmett Till, it's insane to me, because I've known it since I was probably 8 or 9. And there's still things going on regarding his death. But to look at how it was covered and reported in that chapter or area of 100 Years of Lynching, it was crazy. And it is available in the Central Arkansas Library System. That's where I first got it, and then I bought it for like $5 somewhere. But where are we in time? So for video folks, I'm going to cap this right now. And we're going to move on. I'm going to talk about the rest of the reasons why I've chosen those topics. That was a little heavy, and your boy's got to take a break and go to the bathroom. So I'm going to do that. This is going to be the part 1. The part 2, like I said, I'll pick up from those topics, and then what's actually going to start the new episode entirely, it's going to be story time. So we'll see how long that lasts. The videos are going to be longer than the actual audio for the podcast. You can't tell how many gaps there are when I'm speaking. But in story time, I'll just be talking about some personal stories and things that I've been through. Don't want to go too deep. Not going to talk about everything. But as people shared their stories in this time, I definitely wanted to share a couple of mine, because without calling anyone out directly, there's some people that it's interesting what they've said, what they've done, and their track record. So, but anyway, I digress. Story time will happen after the podcast topics. Thanks for tuning in thus far. Peace.